Nadia told herself she could keep everything under control, that the connection she felt with Samir was nothing more than a distraction from the loneliness she endured in her marriage. She repeated that it would never go further, that she knew where the lines were drawn, and that her loyalty to Omar would stop her from crossing them. But each day made the lies harder to believe. The small moments that seemed harmless became the foundation for something more. The way Samir looked at her no longer felt accidental, and the way she looked back was no longer innocent. She tried to dismiss the thoughts, but they lingered, refusing to let her go. Omar's absence grew heavier. His trips lengthened, his calls were shorter, and when he was home, he carried the weight of work even into their bedroom. He often thanked Nadia for being understanding, for supporting him without complaint, for making things easier. Each word of gratitude carried irony she couldn't confess. She wasn't making things easier, she was drowning in silence, and the man he trusted most was the only one offering her air. Omar's trust became the sharpest reminder of her betrayal, and yet she found herself leaning more into the very space he unknowingly created. One evening, when Omar cancelled plans again, Samir arrived as usual. The house felt quieter than it ever had, the air dense with things unsaid. Nadia tried to maintain distance, keeping the conversation light, but Samir's presence unsettled her resolve. He spoke with ease, but beneath his words there was a weight that suggested he knew exactly what was happening. He asked her about herself, her life, her dreams, questions Omar hadn't asked in years. It was disarming, the way he made her feel like she mattered, as if every part of her was worth knowing. She wanted to resist, but she also wanted to be seen. The dinner stretched longer than she expected. She laughed more than she intended. There was a moment where silence fell, and it wasn't uncomfortable, it was charged, filled with something neither of them named. When his hand brushed hers, she should have pulled away, but she didn't. That single hesitation became a decision. She looked at him, and in that look, she admitted everything she had been denying. The pull she felt, the longing that consumed her, the emptiness she had tried to bury, it all surfaced in a single glance. Samir didn't speak, he didn't need to. The space between them collapsed, and with it collapsed the boundaries she thought would protect her. Nadia's heart raced, torn between guilt and desire. She thought of Omar, of her vows, of the trust he placed in her, but those thoughts didn't stop her. The hunger to feel alive again was stronger than the fear of consequences. Samir's closeness consumed her, and when the line was crossed, it wasn't with hesitation but with surrender. She had denied herself for so long that the release felt inevitable. She told herself it was just one moment, just one night, but she knew deep down that what had happened could not be undone afterward. She sat in silence, overwhelmed by the reality of what she had done. Samir seemed calm, almost certain that this was always meant to happen, but for her, it was chaos. She wanted to believe it was a mistake, a weakness she could hide, but the weight of it clung to her. Her body carried the memory, and her mind replayed every second. She was both exhilarated and shattered, unable to reconcile the two. The guilt was immediate and sharp. She thought of Omar's face, of his trust, of the life they had built, and she felt the sting of betrayal. Yet beneath the guilt, another truth lived. she felt alive in a way she hadn't in years. The contradiction tore at her. How could something so wrong feel like the answer to what she had been missing? She wanted to hate Samir, to blame him, but she couldn't. He had only given her what she craved, what her marriage had denied her. The days that followed were heavy. Nadia couldn't meet Omar's eyes without feeling exposed, couldn't hear his voice without imagining he already knew. Every smile he gave her felt like a knife, because she no longer deserved it. Samir, however, acted unchanged. He carried on with the same confidence, though in small ways, he let her know he remembered too. A glance across the room, a subtle touch when no one was watching, a question that meant more than it should. He didn't push, but he didn't let her forget that Nadia's nights became battles with herself. She lay awake beside Omar, who slept without suspicion, while her mind replayed what she had done. Sometimes she closed her eyes and relived the night, hating herself for how much she wanted to feel it again. She promised herself it would never happen again, that she would bury it, but promises had already lost their power. The moment she allowed herself to fall, she changed something that could never be restored. The betrayal wasn't just in the act, it was in the way she carried it afterward. She knew Omar would never see the same woman again, even if he never discovered the truth. Something in her shifted, and the foundation of her marriage cracked beneath her feet. She loved her husband, but the version of herself who had once belonged wholly to him was gone. She had given part of herself to another man, and no amount of guilt could return it. Word count 767 white heavy checkmark. Do you want me to move forward with section 3? 760 words. Aftermath and permanent change, now. Nadia thought the worst was over when she decided to bury the secret deep inside, convincing herself that silence would preserve what little was left of her marriage. But the truth had a way of bleeding through the cracks. Samir was not content with leaving things behind. His presence loomed over her, not only in her memories but in the reality of Omar's world. Omar trusted him more than ever, involving him in business decisions, asking him to accompany them on outings, and praising his loyalty in conversations that twisted the knife deeper into her chest. Nadia carried herself with poise, yet every word spoken in Samir's presence felt like a test of her composure. She realized she was living two lives, one as the devoted wife Omar saw, the other as the guilty woman who had surrendered to temptation. Each glance from Samir reminded her of the second life, one she could never confess but could never escape either. He made subtle efforts to corner her in private, to remind her of the night that still pulsed between them. Sometimes he spoke with quiet certainty, as though he believed their connection was inevitable, not accidental. Other times he remained silent, letting the weight of his gaze carry the message. Nadia resisted, but resistance was exhausting, and her silence often felt like consent. Omar remained oblivious, blind in his trust. He often praised her patience, telling friends she was the reason his life was balanced, the reason he could give so much to his work. The irony left her hollow. She wanted to scream the truth, to confess that she wasn't the saint he believed her to be, that she had shattered their vows in a way that could never be repaired. But fear held her back, fear of losing the life they had built, fear of destroying him, fear of exposing herself. Silence became her shield, though it also became her punishment. The nights grew heavier. Lying beside Omar, Nadia felt the chasm widen. He slept peacefully while she stared at the ceiling, haunted by the weight of what she had done. Memories of Samir came unbidden, intruding at the worst moments, stirring the ache she both despised and desired. She loathed herself for missing what should have never happened, for craving a closeness she should have rejected. The contradiction hollowed her out until she felt like a stranger in her own skin. Her guilt turned into paranoia. Every time Omar looked at her, she wondered if he sensed something. Every time he mentioned Samir, she feared the truth would spill from her expression. She overcompensated with forced smiles, tender words, and gestures she hoped would cover the fractures. Yet the more she tried to mask it, the more unnatural it felt. Omar might not have seen the truth, but Nadia felt certain he noticed that something was different, even if he couldn't name it. Samir complicated everything further. He wasn't reckless enough to expose them, but he wasn't willing to let go either. He would find ways to linger, to create moments that felt like reminders of what had passed. Sometimes he spoke of futures that frightened her, as though what happened wasn't a mistake but the beginning of something. Nadia recoiled, reminding him of her marriage, her loyalty to Omar, but the words rang hollow even to her. She had already betrayed those vows. Repeating them now felt like a desperate attempt to cling to what she had already broken. There were moments she considered ending everything, cutting ties with Samir, forcing distance, rebuilding the fragile trust with Omar. But the threads of betrayal were woven too deeply. Even if she succeeded in pushing Samir away, the memory remained. Even if Omar never found out, the knowledge lived inside her, a constant reminder that she was no longer who she used to be. The damage was already done, irreversible, permanent. She began to see her life as before and after. Before, when she believed in fidelity and the sanctity of her vows. After, when she knew herself capable of crossing lines she once thought unthinkable. The division was sharp, and no amount of pretending could erase it. Nadia realized that her punishment was not discovery but the burden of living with herself. The secret was safe, but safety did not bring peace. It only ensured that the torment would last a lifetime. Omar continued to trust her, never questioning, never doubting. His love remained steady, and his gratitude for her presence grew with every sacrifice he made for his work. But Nadia felt the hollowness behind every embrace, every kiss, every whispered word. The love might have remained, but the purity was gone. What she had shared with Samir had rewritten her marriage, stripping it of its innocence. The truth might never reach Omar's ears, but it lived in every moment of her silence. As the days stretched on, Nadia understood that nothing would return to how it was. She could play her role, she could fulfill her duties, she could keep her secret, but she could not undo the night that changed everything. She was bound to it, bound to the guilt, bound to the memory. She would remain Omar's wife in name and presence, but within herself, she was something else entirely. The woman who once believed she could never betray was gone, replaced by one who carried a truth too heavy to confess. In the stillness of her thoughts, Nadia accepted the cruel permanence of her situation. She had betrayed her husband, betrayed herself, and though the world around her looked unchanged, the reality was different. One choice, one night, one truth had altered everything. She would move forward, but nothing inside her would ever be the same again. Word count 766 white heavy checkmark. Do you want me to now create a final combined title plus gripping description for your faceless video, packaging all 4 sections as one complete story? Nadia often wondered when her marriage had turned into something she barely recognized. In the beginning, she remembered how Omar's presence felt like enough, how his words filled the spaces of her world and his touch carried the warmth of promises. Over time, those promises were not broken but buried under layers of routine and responsibility. He was still there, still providing, still a husband who meant well, but his focus shifted, and her voice no longer seemed to reach him. She became an observer in her own marriage, listening to conversations that were never about them, watching nights pass without intimacy, and telling herself it was normal to feel unseen. Omar was not cruel, he was absent in ways that were harder to explain. He cared for his work, his business, his plans for the future, but somewhere along the line he forgot that the present demanded care too. Nadia told herself often that patience was part of love, that loyalty meant holding on even when nothing was holding you back. Yet beneath her calm exterior, a longing grew that she kept hidden. The silence between them was not full of arguments or resentment but an emptiness that ate away slowly, a quiet void that made her question who she had become. It was during this fragile time that Omar brought Samir into their lives. Samir was his business partner, close enough to be trusted with secrets and decisions Omar barely shared with her. When Omar first introduced him, Nadia noticed his ease with words, how he carried himself with quiet confidence that drew attention without demanding it. Unlike Omar, who had grown more distracted, Samir seemed to notice everything. A compliment here, a question there, a laugh that felt genuine rather than polite. At first it was harmless, a presence in their home that broke the monotony of her days. Omar would often invite Samir over for dinners, sometimes late nights filled with discussions about work. More often than not, Omar left Nadia to entertain him while he stepped out to take calls or rush to another meeting he couldn't postpone. What began as brief exchanges turned into longer conversations, and with each one Samir peeled back a layer of her quietness. He asked about her, not just how she was but what she thought, what she wanted, what she felt about things that Omar rarely asked anymore. It startled her at first to feel seen, but she didn't resist it. She told herself it was just friendliness, the kind that should not carry meaning, but meaning found its way regardless. There were moments that unsettled her, the way his eyes held hers a fraction longer than necessary, how he listened without glancing at his phone, how his laughter filled the room when hers had almost faded from memory. Samir had a way of making her feel like she was not invisible, and though she tried to dismiss it, she caught herself anticipating the times he would come over. When she prepared tea, she wondered what he might say about it. When she dressed, she questioned whether he would notice. These small, unspoken shifts became threads weaving into something she did not intend but could not untangle. Nadia felt guilt pressing against her thoughts. She was a wife, committed to Omar, loyal in the ways she believed mattered most. But loyalty grew heavy when weighed against neglect. Each night when Omar returned exhausted, falling into bed without a word, she lay awake wondering if wanting to be noticed was betrayal in itself. She reasoned that she hadn't done anything wrong, that conversations were innocent, that she was simply grateful for kindness. Still, she knew what was happening. Her heart leaned in directions her vows warned against. The situation deepened when Omar began asking more of her. Business demanded his time, and he trusted Samir completely. He asked Nadia to help, to host him, to keep him company when meetings ran late or travel pulled him away. Omar believed he was easing his own burden, never realizing he was creating one for her. Each request brought her and Samir closer. Each evening stretched into hours where lines blurred between courtesy and connection. Nadia wanted to protest, to explain that this was not as simple as it seemed, but how could she? Omar would never suspect that his closest friend could be the one stirring the parts of her she thought had long gone quiet. As nights blurred into weeks, Nadia noticed how Samir became part of her days without permission. His voice lingered after he left, his laughter replayed in her mind, and his attention fed the emptiness she had carried. She tried to resist, reminded herself of boundaries, but boundaries weakened when reinforced only by silence from Omar. The more her husband trusted, the less she trusted herself. She began to fear not what might happen but how inevitable it was that something would. Nadia often found herself rehearsing explanations she would never speak aloud. She told herself she was only responding to kindness, that anyone in her place would feel the same, that she was still the same woman who married Omar. Yet beneath those reassurances lived a truth she couldn't deny. The situation Omar placed her in was reshaping her. A quiet attraction had grown roots, and she no longer knew if she had the strength to pull them out. The turning point wasn't dramatic, it was subtle, invisible to anyone but her. A dinner, a laugh, a look across the table, a silence filled with something unnamed. That was how it began, not with intention, but with the slow erosion of resistance. She knew she was standing on the edge of something dangerous, and though she hadn't stepped across yet, the ground beneath her was already shifting. Word count 768. White heavy checkmark. Do you want me to continue with section 2? 760 words, where the affair actually happens, in the same faceless, straight to the point narration. Nadia carried the weight of her choice like a shadow that never left her side. Every morning when Omar greeted her with a smile, she felt the sting of guilt sharp enough to pierce her chest. He trusted her more than anyone, relied on her with blind faith, and his affection, though muted by distraction, was still genuine. That made the betrayal harder to endure. She tried to mask it with routine, serving meals, asking about his day, keeping up the image of a faithful wife, but the truth lived beneath her skin. No matter how carefully she concealed it, she knew she had crossed into a place where nothing could ever feel the same again. Samir did not act as though anything had changed, but his eyes betrayed him. In crowded spaces, his glance lingered, carrying a message only she could understand. A brush of his hand when passing something across the table, a question too personal for casual conversation, an ease in his tone that told her he considered what happened more than a fleeting mistake. Nadia dreaded these signals. She wanted to believe it had been one night, a weakness she could bury, but Samir's confidence pulled her into a current she wasn't strong enough to resist. He was unbothered by guilt, while she was consumed by it. Omar remained unaware, often praising her for being supportive, for handling things so well in his absence. His gratitude was unbearable, a reminder of the blind trust she had shattered. Each time he mentioned Samir's loyalty, each time he spoke of him as if he were family, Nadia's stomach twisted. Omar had unknowingly placed her in the path of temptation, and she had failed to turn away. The betrayal wasn't only physical, it was emotional, and it hollowed her out from the inside. Nights became the hardest to endure. Omar lay beside her, exhausted, unknowing, while her mind replayed what she wished she could erase. Sleep came rarely, and when it did, it was restless. She woke with the memory of Samir still clinging to her. It wasn't only the act she couldn't escape, it was the way she had felt in his presence. She had come alive in ways that terrified her, and though she despised herself for it, she longed for that feeling again. The contradiction was unbearable. She loved Omar, yet she craved what Samir had awakened in her. Samir tried to meet her again, subtle at first and then more direct. He didn't ask questions as much as he made suggestions, as if he assumed she couldn't resist. She found herself torn between fear and desire, avoiding him when she could but unable to ignore the pull when he was near. His charm was intoxicating, his attention addictive, and though her guilt screamed against it, her silence betrayed her weakness. She wanted to be stronger, to walk away, but each encounter chipped at the resolve she tried to rebuild. She considered confessing once, imagining what it would be like to tell Omar the truth, to end the torment of carrying it alone. But the thought of his devastation silenced her. Confession would not cleanse her, it would destroy him. The marriage would collapse, the trust would vanish, and she would become the woman who ruined everything. Silence, she told herself, was the lesser crime, though she knew it was a coward's refuge. The secret became a prison she built with her own hands, one she could never escape. The more she tried to distance herself from Samir, the more the tension grew. He pressed, not aggressively, but with certainty that she would eventually give in again. Nadia realized that what terrified her most was not being discovered, but the truth that she wanted him despite her fear. She had stepped across a line once, and the memory of it lived inside her like a dangerous promise. The craving was a reminder that some things, once awakened, never returned to sleep. Omar's presence no longer brought comfort but dread. Every look, every touch, every word of trust reminded her of what she had broken. She performed the role of the dutiful wife with precision, but inside she was fractured. The marriage continued, the house remained intact, but the foundation was no longer solid. She wondered if Omar sensed it on some level, if he noticed the way her smile never reached her eyes, or the way she avoided his gaze. If he did, he never said, perhaps choosing ignorance over confrontation. Nadia realized the cruel truth, even if Omar never discovered the betrayal, their life together was already altered. She could never return to the woman she was before. She had changed, and with that change came a distance that could never be bridged. Samir might fade from her life one day, but the memory would not. It was etched into her, an irreversible shift that redefined everything she thought she knew about love, loyalty, and herself. The situation Omar had placed her in had forced open a door she could never close. She could not blame him entirely, nor absolve herself. The responsibility was hers, and so was the burden. She told herself she would not repeat the mistake, but she knew that promise carried little weight. The truth was simple yet unbearable. She had betrayed her husband, and though he might never learn of it, the betrayal lived in her every breath, every thought, every silence and the quiet of her own mind. Nadia accepted the reality she could not escape. She was no longer the woman who believed in unbroken vows and unshakable loyalty. One night had changed her forever, and though life around her looked the same, nothing inside her would ever be again. She had crossed a line, and no matter how carefully she walked forward, the past followed, whispering its truth. She could hide it, she could deny it, but she could never erase it. The marriage remained, but she knew it was built on a secret that would never let her rest. Word count 768 white heavy check mark. Would you like me to now create a short, gripping YouTube style description with the title to package this story for your faceless video?